There are a lot of phrases that come our way in the numerous conversations that make up World of Warcraft discourse. For me, they share a number of attributes. They're subjective, they hold validity, and after a while, they tend to make your eyes roll like, oh, fun detected? Yeah, that's really original. Today I want to bring up one particular phrase that should sound familiar. It's said in different ways, but it sums up to wanting a game like the World of Warcraft to respect the player's time. No one owns a one true meaning of the phrase. There are a lot of different meanings behind it. Today I'm going to share my interpretation of it relative to the World of Warcraft and then frame some critiques around it. The hope is to spark some fun conversation, although, of course, I'm going to count on being accused of defending Blizzard, another eye-rolling phrase like, okay. By the way, hey, it's Soul, and let's talk some smack. Respecting our time isn't a new feeling, but it's a more recently thrown around phrase. Probably came from, giant ABC content creator, and it, took off like it always does. I hear this phrase in a number of complaints. One is to grind a thing that you don't like to do for a thing that you need to do the thing that you actually want to do. That's going to be the main focus of today's conversation. Cross-gearing would be an easy example. You farm for the good PvE trinkets so you can succeed in PvP. A more nuanced example, Torghast is the only reasonable path to obtaining a legendary piece of gear. Not everybody loves Torghast, but legendaries do take you pretty far. The next point I'm not going to get too much into during this piece, not to say that they're not important at all, but they're more like symptoms of the original sin. There is the complaint that lies with alt-friendliness or unfriendliness, which is a closely related topic. Torghast on all of your alts? Oh, sounds fun, right? Actually, maybe, because we can't ignore that some people have a grand old time in Torghast, or otherwise, they don't mind loops that take them in unexpected directions. To a lesser extent, there's the usual grumbling of the raw grindiness of an individual activity like Conquest, or Valor, or Mythic Plus score. Like that was a big one, where Doomsayers were clutching their pearls over having to run 15th on both Fortified and Tyrannical, the horror. Which, for some people it was, yeah. And then there's the canceling of our efforts where catch-ups to content, while convenient, also kind of it mentally invalidates the work that was put towards the previous content. I have my own axes to grind, but first I want to share just how much WoW has changed over the years, and especially recently with regards to alt-friendliness and reducing the grind. A few small strides were made during Mist of Pandaria with a reputation buff that lets alts gain rep a little bit faster. It's easy to understand, and it's often referred to in these sorts of conversations. In Warlords of Draenor, most armor pieces, with the exception of weapons and some trinkets, will change with your specialization. Meanwhile, main stats are no longer on accessories. So this change was lauded by hybrid classes who had to farm up entire separate gear sets per spec. In more recent years, WoW's reputation rewards took a big shift, with utility and throughput items being knocked down to the requirement of revered, while exalted rewards were just cosmetic. Another thing to add, cosmetic rewards like pets and mounts and tabards are account-wide, which makes that need to hit exalted with each of our alts a mostly pointless exercise. Crafting and catch-ups have made it a lot easier for people to at least get started with endgame content. And there are some drawbacks and issues to everything that I've mentioned. I'm just pointing out where the grinds have been reduced. Shadowlands has embraced the idea of being alt-friendly more than any other expansion that I can think of, but not without creating new problems. The new 10 to 50 experience is, it's another leveling experience, but it gives players more options than ever before. The 50 to 60 experience starts off as an on-rails experience through an initial quest line that is no longer a thing for alt if you choose to. Those who like playing multiples of the same class don't have to worry about farming for multiples of the same legendary recipes. Small potatoes, I know. Meanwhile, massive chunks of story content that gates certain features are skippable on alts. Flying, an account-wide thing, came pretty darn early in this expansion too. Numerous perks in the Maw and Korthia, which require a lengthy grind, are mostly shared across the account. Renown is earned extremely quickly, whether you're on an alt or if you're new to Shadowlands. Soul Ash, the main currency of Torghast, can now at least be traded down to alts. On the flip side, there are some notably less alt-friendly bits about Shadowlands' specific features. Conduits are a not so high priority thing, but they are pretty time consuming of an upgrade, especially for players who want multiple heavily geared characters to choose between. Players only have one soulbind available on their character until they complete the entire 9.0 Covenant campaign, which is an hours-long venture. On the transmog end, there are a ton of appearances that come from Covenant, multiplied by the 4 armor types. From the get-go, there's been a big worry about wanting to unlock every single appearance and how account-wide these unlocks would be, considering Covenant choice being so central to the Shadowlands experience. There's the Covenants themselves, and the friction that comes from switching between them, and then having to progress through another campaign for those soulbinds. Domination shards and sockets, which is a mostly raid-centric feature, take a while to set up between getting the shards, powering them up, and having the gear to slot them in. And at least right now, the income is fixed with no alt catch-up. Systems on top of systems. It's another lovely phrase to elicit maximum emotional response with as few syllables as possible. But in this conversation, it is an effective phrase to help pinpoint what it is that respecting time means for a lot of people who use the term. And it goes back to some of my own critiques that I've used in the past, complete with what I thought was catchy phrasing that just never took off. And what I mean is that we're spending too much time preparing our characters and not enough time feeling like we're ready to play our characters. This goes way back to early role-playing games where we prep our characters for a long adventure, like stocking up on consumables, repairing our armor, upgrading our weapon to a +5, that sort of thing. In World of Warcraft's early days, we got our potions and our flasks, we enchanted our gear and collected weapons and did attunements, and sometimes this involved painfully long grinds for materials or reputation or more. We've seen this preparation evolve over the years too, like, hey, let's pool resources together so we can craft that one legendary weapon that's going to help us take out that big bad. Or let's power up everybody's legendary ring because when we use it all together, the magic happens. Let's collect gear from that other place so we can make our set bonuses. In the Warcraft of the past 5 or so years, that preparation reached new heights. We gotta find that legendary piece of gear, we gotta maintain our artifact power and complete that campaign for the additional relic slot, and hey, here's the Netherlight Crucible, more gear slots that last for one patch. And fast forward to now. Each character requires a level of personal preparation. A lot of it is natural or just easy to obtain, like levels. Renown is actually easy. Most gear, gems and enchants, basic conduit development, and if you're a raider, domination set bonuses are something that you naturally get, outside of the world boss and the optional weekly quest, of course. But there's another level of personal prep that involves what I consider to be outside work, and I'm talking about legendaries and soulbinds and advanced conduit development. And if you're not normally a raider, domination shards. Even if you are a raider, if you have alts, domination set bonuses are going to be harder to develop. I don't agree with most of the more rabid criticism over whether the game respects our time or not. There's going to be a forever argument that the WoW devs wake up every morning with the intent to serve their masters at Evil Vision, making gameplay loops to increase engagement and time played and so on and so forth. It's hard to imagine them being like, hey investors, people love Torghast and everyone's running it for legendaries. But I get it. It's a lot of work that goes into a character, and we've got to respect the notion that it doesn't matter if you're a world-class player or so bumpkin. If we want to play multiple characters or just have a good time, the path shouldn't feel like it's got to take multiple detours, and there are people out there who find that frustrating. It can also feel frustrating when your hard work over the course of a season is fleeting, with the next season offering not just a new level of power, but a catch-up that makes one wonder, what I worked so hard for over the past few months, why is it that the game doesn't respect my time? So I guess in all those statements and all this rambling so far, there's my attempt to demonstrate my understanding, even if I don't quite share those feelings. And I ought to share where I'm coming from as a gamer. You probably could consider me a boomer in this sense, but I've said many times that as a gamer, I look at the gauntlet, the challenge that's laid out before me, And setting aside bugs that I'd report, I just deal with it. I don't take on a challenge by telling the devs to respect my time. They just make games with experiences to choose from, and I work through it, or I make yes or no decisions because it's up to me to respect my time. Farmable currency? I'll just calculate it and schedule it out. If it's a random drop, well, shucks, I can't control it, so I'm not gonna worry about it. I make the situation work for me, and I sometimes will make tough decisions where maybe I just won't get that optimal Azurite essence, or it's okay if I don't have that set bonus with max item level, or my legendary just stays at a rank 4. And I'm not broke, I can gold my way to victory if I really wanted to, but that's not where my values lie. I admit this more relaxed approach definitely comes from running my guild. I don't need to worry about finding the right group or whatever when I run the whole operation, which clues you in on how the World of Warcraft or MMO experience can be very, very different for people depending on the approach that they take. But when it comes to alts, yeah, my feelings are pretty mixed, and I admit that my perspective is limited. As many of you know, I'm a one-trick pony with my paladin tank, and my alts are like serfs that are feeding the master. I believe that if you're going to play multiple specs and or multiple classes, you're going to add to your plate. You are going to put more time into the game than someone like me. But I also believe, as many have said, as Ian has admitted, that there's a point where the game should acknowledge that you, the player, not the character, but the player, did the work and shouldn't have to do the same work over and over again when the experience is one-to-one the same. This has been demonstrated occasionally throughout Shadowlands. I mentioned the initial leveling campaign as well as the story skips. Most of the Torghast, Maw, and Korthia progression is account-wide, and there's whatever else that I mentioned earlier. But I also think that it's not enough. There's gotta be more that they can do. The Maw intro skip is a terrific start and something that can't be explained given how far we are into the expansion. So you see what I mean about having mixed feelings? Like, I think people should put in the work, but also should have the monotonous barriers lifted. Like quest campaign, easy. Account-wide rep grind, that's a lot more complicated of a conversation. There is no easy template, but my takeaway for Blizzard on this subject is that they've got to pause for a second and step back to identify and implement these skippable or shareable points early, just like they did with the quest campaigns. But on top of that, I think that down the line, future WoW content should do away with trying to tie important preparation like conduits or legendaries to what are mostly unrelated activities, with the big offender in Shadowlands being Torghast, and we'll make an example of this right now. I happen to enjoy doing Torghast, but it is a bit weird tying it to legendary crafting and almost nothing else. Meanwhile, we have the Covenant Sanctum, which isn't tied to much of anything except for cosmetic rewards and some perks in world content. I think that instead of tying Torghast to character development, it should have been somehow tied to the Covenant Sanctum instead. Now you gotta use your imagination here, I'm just making up stupid ideas, but imagine the relationship between farming Torghast and legendaries is gone. It's totally gone. Instead of it being a place to farm soul ash or whatever, you raid it, either solo or with a group, and your goal now is to get stolen anima and loot. I mean, after all, you're the badass mall walker who can dip in and out as you please. You're here to solve the anima drought or whatever. And where's the anima? Somewhere over there. So what this does is set up a relationship between Torghast and your Covenant as a content loop. You break into Torghast for anima and redeemed souls. You use the anima and the souls to power up the Sanctum for perks that help out with not just world content, but perks to help you climb further up Torghast to get more anima, more cosmetics, and more whatever the heck else. You can use the mission table to get items to use inside Torghast, or special buffs, or items that start side quests to explore certain cell blocks for even more stuff. I mean, some of you may remember doing missions in the Legion table that start quests that have you get into like mythic dungeons or raids, and have that be supported throughout the expansion, this very closed loop. How about, well, let's add to this a little bit. How about some special gear in Torghast that works, okay in other content, but it gets awesome bonuses inside Torghast? Or there can be anima powers that enhance this very special Torghast specific gear. Again, this turns Torghast into an activity that sits mostly outside of regular character progression. I'm talking about the big three: raids, dungeons, and PvP. Now, thinking about this, and kind of as a side note, thinking about this has me wondering about the Maw and how it was sort of forced to exist in the 9.0 release. Like, we knew that at one point the Maw and Torghast had a content loop of running the Maw for these Torghast keys, and then running Torghast for rewards. It seems that without that, the Maw needed to have some sort of use. So, redeemed souls, which were in Torghast during the alpha, were moved to the Maw, as were Torghast perks with Venari. But anyway, let's get back on topic. The biggest takeaway that I have for Blizzard is, again, to reconsider making features that are tied to unrelated things. I don't necessarily mean to not have extra features or a measured instance of borrowed power. Like, domination charts actually do a pretty good job of this, because it's an almost entirely closed system between the Maw and, very closely related content. I do think that if, like PvP, domination shard bonuses had a reduced effectiveness in Mythic Plus, we would see way less friction from Mythic Plus folk who feel compelled to raid just for those extra increases. I recall previous interviews with Ian where he stood his ground on crossing content, that in order to be at that top 1%, it's okay if that player needs to do some extra work. And I can get behind that, because those 1% of players, they're going to find a way to reach greater heights in the least likely of places. But what we're seeing here in Shadowlands is extra work by design. Technically, we don't need legendaries to complete most content, but when they're a high-profile feature of an expansion, the audience is not going to consider making a hard choice, they're just going to do it. In my earlier idea, I yanked legendaries away from Torghast. If the requirements of Soul Ash or Cinders didn't exist today, and all we needed were professions to make legendaries, I don't think anyone would pay mind to it at all. If World of Warcraft's discourse was a four-legged chair, doing away with the roundabout preparation of our characters would knock off like one of those legs. It wouldn't collapse, but it would go a long, long way towards addressing many players' complaints, including alt-friendliness, diminishing efforts, and the straight grind. My hopes for 9.2 are that tier set bonuses are going to feel as familiar and or as frustrating as they have been in the past. And who knows, maybe Blizzard can lift the Torghast requirements of legendaries, and then they can focus on making it into like this festival of violence that can persist to future expansions. But now, I'm letting blind hope get the better of me. So that's gonna be it. Share your thoughts, like the video, stay safe, stay healthy, and stay breezy.